Hi, for those that are new to the channel, I'm Sean Pinner, former British serviceman and Ukrainian Marine. Why did Russia invade Ukraine? And more importantly, where does that leave them now? 3.5 years later, Russia's not the empire it wanted to be. It's a giant with clay feet. It's a nuclear power, yes, but its weaknesses have been exploited by Ukraine for the world to see. Its oil industry is bleeding, its economy is collapsing, and its size, supposed to be its strength, has become its greatest weakness. It's really important to look at why Putin invaded, how the numbers expose Russia's decline, and why it's becoming increasingly realistic that Ukraine could walk back into those occupied territories without firing a single shot. The collapse no one expected, or did they?
Decision on whether to supply Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine or sell them to NATO and let them sell them to Ukraine.
Yeah, I sort of made a decision, pretty much, if you consider. Yeah, I think I want to find out what they're doing with them.
Yes.
You know, where are they sending them, I guess. I'd have to ask that question. That war should never have started.
Let's start with the hard truth. Just to recap, this war was never about NATO missiles or imaginary Nazis. It was about control, imperial nostalgia, and a fear of losing influence over Ukraine forever. Putin literally wrote in 2021 that Ukraine and Russia are one people. He sees Ukraine's independence as a historical mistake to be corrected, not a sovereign right to be respected, despite recognising Ukrainian sovereignty in many agreements, including the Budapest Memorandum. That mindset, a mix of Soviet hangover and Tsarist nostalgia, fuels everything in Russia. The Kremlin saw Ukraine moving towards the West, trade with the EU, training with NATO, and panicked. They didn't need tanks on the border. They needed a buffer zone, a puppet state, a frozen conflict they could control from Moscow. And when that didn't work, they went full invasion, believing Kiev would collapse in 3 days. And we all know how that turned out.
Мирнов Алексей Валерьевич с Иркутска вызвал ИВАК. ИВАКа нету. Связи тоже не стало. На запросы никто не отвечает. Здесь только 200-е. Было больше 20 человек. Я остался один. Эти пидорасы забыли про нас. Наше командование ебучее. Смотрите, пацаны, сами. Я вот этих пацанов не знаю. Вот смотрите, что с нами стало. Вот это вот Жека. Я с ним был в одной учебке. Но этого я тоже не знаю. Так что, пацаны, не идите сюда на Украину нахуй воевать. Не наша эта война. Подумайте о своих семьях, о детях, о своих. Как вы их любите. Все уедем в черных мешках. Я прошел столько, по стольким трупам.
Let's be honest, ideology sells wars to the public, but money keeps it going. Eastern Ukraine isn't just farmland and factories, it's rich in coal, minerals and industrial infrastructure. Controlling the south also meant controlling the Black Sea trade and gas routes. For a regime addicted to oil and gas income, that mattered more than any flag on the border. Before 2022, oil and gas made up 45% of Russia's federal budget. Today, even with sanctions, it's still around 30%. That's a house built on a single barrel of oil. Putin thought Ukraine would surrender. Instead, it united. He thought the West would divide. Instead, it just tooled up. He thought sanctions would be temporary. Instead, they became the long game. He overestimated Russia's military and underestimated Ukrainian spirit. And now he's fighting a 20th century war in a 21st century world. Russia currently controls about 20% of Ukraine's territory, but has lost over half of its initial gains from 2022. That's not victory. That's a bleeding wound. Russia is bleeding out.
So disappointed in President Putin. I thought he would get this thing over with. He should have had that war done in a week. And I said to him, you don't look good. You're 4 years fighting a war that should have taken a week. Are you a paper tiger?
Бумажный тигр. Я же сказал, что Россия все эти годы воюет не с ВСУ, не с Украиной, а воюет практически со всеми странами НАТО.
They say size matters, but in Russia's case, it's become the anchor dragging it under. A country that big needs infrastructure, logistics, and control. But when sanctions hit, distances become choke points. It costs billions just to maintain occupied zones, fuel shortages, stretched supply lines, weak regional loyalty, and now internal unrest simmering in places like Dagestan to the Far East. Every kilometre Russia tries to hold is another liability. Every refinery hit is another domino in a collapsing system. And while Putin sells stability, the reality is chaos with a few fancy press conferences thrown in, and of course Russian propaganda. Even RT, state-run Kremlin lies are having their budgets cut by a third. When your whole world depends on propaganda, cutting your main weapon down by a third is just massive. Now for the real question that matters the most. What happens if this continues? If oil prices stay low and Ukraine keeps targeting refineries and logistics, Russia's war machine slows to a crawl. And here's the wild scenario. It becomes increasingly possible that, in some regions, Russia could simply walk away. Not with a treaty, not with fireworks, just fatigue, debt and silence. We may see the first modern war where a superpower retreats not because it was defeated, but because it simply ran out of breath. And when that happens, Ukraine won't need to storm every trench. We might just walk back in. I might just be going home without a shot even being fired.
Стоянка полная, Арфат. Все темпочники. Добро нету, говорят. Стоим.
So where does that leave us? 3 years ago, Putin rolled the dice, betting on fear, oil and nostalgia. He thought tanks and terror could rebuild an empire. He thought the world would look away and that Ukraine would simply fold. But he didn't understand was that courage doesn't collapse. It digs in, it endures, it adapts. Putin's war was built on lies, and those lies are now cracking faster than his oil pipelines. He promised his people power but delivered poverty. He promised stability but brought isolation. He promised victory but can't even fuel his own war machine. That being said, the myth of Russian strength, that it is the unstoppable bear, has been exposed as what it always was. A mirage held together by propaganda, gas and fear. The truth is, Russia's size is its weakness. You can't control 11 time zones when you're running out of men, out of money and out of excuses. There is now talk on Russian chats at the realization amongst their own that after 10 years and over 1 million casualties, there may be mobilization, possibly later this year, just to be able to take Donetsk Oblast. Every kilometre they occupy cost them fuel, blood and legitimacy. Every drone strike, every refinery fire, every lost tanker is another thread pulled from their dying empire. The world thought Russia's size made it unstoppable, but in reality, that size is what's tearing it apart. Too big to control, too fragile to reform, and too proud to admit defeat. Ukraine has already won the moral war. The economic one is now catching up. Every rebuilt home, every soldier returning to the front, every mother refusing to leave is proof that resilience beats tyranny every time. This isn't just about Ukraine anymore. It's about every nation that's ever stared down a bully and said, no more. Russia may still occupy land, but Ukrainian occupies the world's respect. And As that empire crumbles under its own weight, remember this: Ukraine doesn't just fight with weapons, it fights with truth, with courage, and with the belief that freedom is worth every sacrifice. That's what makes this war different. That's what makes Ukraine unbreakable. Thanks for watching. If you believe truth and context still matters, share, like, repost, and let the facts speak louder than Kremlin propaganda. Thanks for watching.